I had sisters growing up in the FLDS church that I saw get married at a very young age.
Yeah.
And at the young age that I was, I couldn't really understand what they must have been feeling. What were your feelings getting married at that age? Though you may have felt it was your choice, did it really feel that way?
No, when I got older, it really didn't. And there was a lot of abuse that happened with my ex-husband before we even got married. And which then just solidified, there was some abuse that happened. And when I went to he went to my dad and just told my dad, I spent time and resources on this girl with the intent of marrying her, and she's not cooperating. And so then I got a phone call from my dad telling me that I owed him an apology for not cooperating. And so I didn't always feel that I had the option to say no.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in a family with 4 moms and 35 kids. We were members of the FLDS Church, which is a polygamous group run by their prophet, Warren Jeffs, who is now serving a life sentence in prison.
I was raised mainstream LDS. Sam and I have been married for 10 years now and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We also wanted to remind everyone that we have this kind of crazy goal of reaching 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yes, today we are so excited to have Melanie and Cory from Note to Self 444. They have a YouTube channel, TikTok, all of the social media platforms, and we're super excited to hear more of their story of growing up in the AUB. Thanks so much for being here, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I was getting to chat with them a little bit off camera before this, and I'm like even more excited for this interview. I was excited before, now I'm even more excited. All the experiences, Melanie is in the know. Did you know that? She's in the know.
Well, Melanie, just to kind of set the stage here, who is your dad?
So my dad is the actual current prophet / leader, whatever they are currently calling it, of the AUB, or the Apostolic United Brethren.
So I just wanted her to point that out because that explains why she's so much in the know, right?
Yeah. But I guess we should probably start at the beginning for both of you, because I know you're both raised in the AUB. But Melanie, will you start off a little bit like, where did you grow up? How many moms did you have? That's always a popular question. How many children were there? What did your upbringing look like?
So I grew up with 4 moms and 34 kids. So pretty close to Sam there. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One of the wives left. And so we only had the 4 there at home. My dad's currently has 7 or 8. Sorry, 8. And so I'm my mom's oldest. My mom was the second wife, and I'm her oldest child. And all 34 of us, we grew up in the Salt Lake Valley. We all lived in separate houses. We just kind of grew up mainstream, went to public school. Most of us went to public school. And being the oldest, it was, I learned a lot. So being the oldest there.
How many children did your mother have? So like in that home, because being the oldest, I know is typically a big responsibility. How many kids were there?
She had 11 total, but by the time I moved out, she had 9. So,
okay.
Yeah, so she didn't have any more than 9 when I lived with her. I got married very young, a week into 17. And so I moved out very early.
Wow.
What does that look like, the process of getting married as a teenage bride, basically in the AUB? Like, did you get to decide? We've heard these like conflicting messages within the AUB of like the women are getting to decide or the girls are kind of getting to pick. And then there's other times where we hear like they're getting to pick, but they're kind of told. What did that look like for you? Did you have any say?
Yeah, I would definitely say I got to pick, but I was told. I wasn't forced down the aisle for sure, but I was strongly suggested to do that.
Well, and me coming from the FLDS side of things, I can understand where people feel that they are making a decision for themselves. But when you are raised to believe a certain thing and you're told this is the only way you can believe in this life, are you really making the choice, right? So I can understand that being a little complicated.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned AUB multiple times, and I know there will be a lot of people asking, what is AUB? Can you just explain to us a little bit about, and then we'll get more into your story, but a little bit about what is the AUB? What does that stand for? Kind of a little bit of backstory on that.
Okay, the AUB is one of the larger polygamous communities here in the Salt Lake Valley, and it's called the Apostolic United Brethren. And it actually wasn't known to me that it was really the AUB. Most of my life, we called it the group. And so I didn't even know till I was a lot older that it was named Apostolic United Brethren. And so there are one of the larger groups here in the Salt Lake Valley. A lot of social media or a lot of media stuff has come out of the AUB, people telling their stories out of the AUB. Most of the prophets have been here in the Salt Lake Valley. But I think the Kingstons are rivaling our group, like size now. I'm not really sure. But from what I've always been told, the AUB is the largest polygamous community here in Utah right now.
I see. Okay.
And they're fundamental Mormons, right?
Correct.
So
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yep. Fundamental
okay.
polygamous Mormons. Yep. So, and the church is out here in the south end of the Salt Lake Valley. And there is, I want to say the last count I heard, there's a little over 10,000 members.
Okay.
So it's pretty big.
Interesting how all the fundamentalist polygamous Mormon groups claim to be the biggest. When I was in the FLDS, we claimed to be the biggest fundamentalist, it's just so funny because they preach how important and how the scriptures say that the number of those faithful in the end will be so few. Were you taught that as well?
Yes. In fact, I even talk about that on one of my podcasts, that was always held over your head. Will you be one of the 144,000? Because it will only be a few that will be called to live this way. And we were always taught that if you were called to live this way, you were extremely special because not very many are chosen.
Okay, so you guys believe in the 144,000.
Yeah.
So that is so intriguing to me because did the FLDS believe in that?
No.
Okay, so the FLDS don't. The Kingstons do, though, because they actually like number their men. Like the priesthood, they can say like, I'm number 23 or whatever. Did you actually have numbers or was it just trying to be faithful enough to be in that group?
Yeah, no numbers for us. Just if you were faithful enough to be in that 144.
Mm-hmm. And then the mainstream LDS doesn't believe in the 144. I mean, they would have had to give that up a long time ago to end up being such a big global church, right? Like no one would join anymore. So that's so interesting. I wonder where like the Kingston and AUB line held on to that in the same direction.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. See, and I was always taught, both of my parents converted in from the mainstream Mormon church. So we were always taught to have the utmost respect for the church. We were not allowed to talk negatively about it. But we were always taught that the 144 were the ones that would keep the true gospel. And then the church would follow along in the millennium.
I see.
Do you mind me asking, especially since your parents came from the mainstream LDS, and it does seem like that happens a lot, like Cody Brown came from the mainstream LDS and Janelle came from the mainstream LDS, and I believe Brady Williams came from the
My Five Wives.
That seems to be pretty common that a lot of LDS people. So while respecting the LDS, what did they say was the main differences that made the AUB the true church and made you, like if you were the AUB, you were living it correctly and made the mainstream LDS church wrong or like having gone astray?
So I was always taught, and maybe Cory, I don't know if you were taught, I was always taught that the church was the mother and it was the nurturing. Let's bring everybody to Jesus, or to Christ or to the gospel. And then the AUB was the father the father energy, held the proper priesthood. And that one day the two would be united again, and then you'd have the father energy and the mother energy coming back together. And so it was the AUB's responsibility to keep the keys of the priesthood and polygamy Yeah.
Wow.
So when they gave up celestial marriage,
plural marriage
in the day, that was just, I guess, a temporary to appease the government, but they set aside people to still carry on the polygamy.
Right.
Part of it. The special priesthood set aside so that they could carry on that polygamy. That's their teachings. So
wow. Okay, so it's very much more like hand in hand with the mainstream church, and that eventually they'll be combined.
Yeah.
Man, I hate to break it to the AUB, but the mainstream LDS church does not reciprocate that feeling at all.
No, they don't. No, but that's what I was taught my entire life. And literally, I could not. I mean, you didn't speak ill of the Mormon church at all, the mainstream Mormon church. And really, I feel like my dad is the one who really implemented that more so than anyone else.
So, going back to your story here, Cory, you also were raised in the AUB as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Did you two know each other at all while you were both living in the AUB? Wow. Okay.
I was born here in Utah, but then I was raised up in Montana. My family moved up to Montana when I was young, and we were raised in Pinesdale, Montana, and I grew up there. At 18, I moved out and came down here and lived with some of my aunt and my grandmother who were in the LDS church. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And is there a big group of AUB in Montana?
Yeah. There's a whole compound. Yeah. I don't know how many people are in the town.
I don't know. They went through multiple prophets in the last couple of years.
And it's caused a lot of division.
And so Pinesdale has split and split and split. So I don't know how many people in Pinesdale claim to be AUB.
Right.
But yeah, there was a big group of them when I grew up there.
Right.
And when you grew up there, did you believe that the prophet was the same prophet in the Salt Lake Valley? Like, did you all have the same prophet at one point?
Yeah.
They had a picture of him up on the wall.
Yeah. He's the same prophet for the Mexico colony, for Salt Lake, for they're all over Utah, but and then Montana.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I'm trying to think now. I don't think we had my dad loved Rulon Allred.
Who started the AUB.
Started the AUB, but in 77, I think, or
79, Rulon was killed.
He was killed. One of those dates he was killed.
By the LeBarons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we had a picture and a bust of Rulon Allred in our house.
Yeah.
I think we had a small picture of the priesthood council somewhere in our house.
Yeah.
Hidden in the corner.
We were really raised. We were raised by. My dad wasn't really he taught mostly what Rulon had taught him. So
I see.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, so thank you for answering that question, Melanie. So what was the position of your dad when you were born into this?
So he was converted from the LDS church. Rulon converted him. Cory's dad actually baptized him into the AUB. Yeah. Cory's dad proselyted a lot for Rulon and went out there and kind of got memberships, got people to come in and join. And so, my dad was actually baptized in there. So he was, he converted when I want to say he was like 16 or 17, but then he married his first wife in the LDS temple, in the Salt Lake temple. And then married my mom, I want to say about 18 months later, maybe in the church, in the Polygamist church. And so he didn't really have a position in other than he was like one of the 70s or, something like that until I was 19. And then he was made one of the apostles when I was 19 years old.
Is it pretty common though for them to get, for people in the AUB to get married, their first marriage in the mainstream church? Because I feel like I recently saw a post from Mary Brown talking about how her parents' first marriage was done in the LDS temple, but the AUB has their own temples, right?
They didn't back then. So the temples didn't come around until I was maybe like 12, something around that. And that's when they started building. And they actually don't call them temples. They call them endowment houses, where you go and you receive your garments and your endowments. And the first one wasn't built until I was about 12 years old, maybe 10, something like that. So up until that point, it was just a spiritual marriage that was performed by one of the priesthood heads. So Rulon I believe is the one who married my parents. And so back then, the AUB was not really even formed until about 1970, 70-ish. And so they really didn't have organization back then. And so a lot of these people were converting out of the LDS mainstream church and coming into the group. So that's why they were married in the temple ahead of time.
Okay. That's making the puzzle pieces come together more.
I'm starting to understand it. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Wow.
So by the time that you got married at 17, right? You said you were 17 years old. W- What did that marriage look like for you? What does a typical marriage in the AUB look like? And especially being under the age of 18, did you have to get special approval to be married in Utah, or what did that look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, well, I had to get special approval from the leadership of the AUB at the time, but of course, it had helped that my dad was so in with the leadership. And so typically, most women don't get married under the age of 18 in the AUB. It happens, and it's happened a lot, but it's not very typical. In fact, I remember my dad was talking to me one time about talking to the leader of the FLDS back in the day, telling him, you
Mhm.
guys got to stop doing these child brides. You got to stop doing these child brides. And of course, this was after I was married and had a baby at 17. so,
Wow.
but I remember the conversation very distinctly. And yeah, I had to get special permission. I had to go and talk to the prophet, which at the time was Owen Allred. And but the thing was, is my family, I was the next one in line. Like they were just marrying because we were converted in. So we were considered new blood. And so a lot of people wanted to marry some of that new blood. And I was more of a trophy, more not necessarily somebody that he really wanted to marry. And
Mm.
so he had to marry me quick, or I would have gotten wiser and not married that young. And so that's why it happened so fast. So I got married 8 days after my 17th birthday. I went through the endowment house and got married. Oh yeah.
What
Wow.
what were the feelings? Because sorry, I just the reason I'm so curious about this is I had sisters growing up in the FLDS church that I saw get married at a very young age.
Yeah.
And at the young age that I was, I couldn't really understand what they must have been feeling. What were your feelings getting married at that age? Though you may have felt it was your choice, did it really feel that way?
No, when I got older, it really didn't. And there was a lot of abuse that happened with my ex-husband before we even got married.
Hmm.
And which then just solidified, there was some abuse that happened. And when I went to he went to my dad and just told my dad, I spent time and resources on this girl with the intent of marrying her, and she's not cooperating. And so then I
Mm.
got a phone call from my dad telling me that I owed him an apology for not cooperating. And so I didn't always feel that I had the option to say no, but I also thought I was so big and so grown up, and I'm making this decision. But I became very responsible very young. My mom had cancer. I basically ended up being the mother to my mom's children. And so it felt very natural for me almost to get married that young because, now of course I look back and go, what was I thinking? But back then it felt very, oh, this is what you need to do. And then at that point my dad doubled us up. We all lived in single houses until on my 16th birthday. And then he doubled us all up into other houses. So at one point we had 17 children and 3 adults in a 2,500 square foot home. And there was
Wow.
just no place for me. I didn't have a bed. I didn't have a dresser. I didn't have anything. So the next option was to really just marry me off to someone else who could take care of me because there just wasn't space.
Oof. Did
Yeah.
you at that how does the AUB, do they have any sexual education? Did you understand fully
No,
that part of what a marriage was gonna look like, or that was gonna be a part of it when you got married?
no, really nothing other than the abuse that I had experienced growing up, which was pretty extensive. And I do talk about a lot of that in my podcast, some of the abuses that I experienced. But yeah, I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about the endowment. When I went in there, I was stunned. Like the only thing I knew was getting my temple clothes ready and my garments ready with my mom. And she would kind of explain a little bit here and there, but it was very minimal. And, now they go back and they're like, well, it was so sacred. We didn't want to talk about it. We didn't know what we could say and what we couldn't say. So when I went in there, I literally knew nothing. I had no idea about washings and anointings. I had no idea about any of those things. And in fact, my ex-husband and I, when we were done at the end of the day, he comes out and he's like, did you know that no, I had no idea. So then we kind of compared a little bit of notes, and it was like, we had no idea that was going to happen. So it was a pretty intense day. And then there was another couple in there getting a second wife, and that added to the intensity of it because there was a
Mm.
lot of emotion going on. In the AUB, they do one temple ceremony a month. And so everyone who wants to get married comes to that one ceremony. So
Oh,
people
wow.
drive up from southern Utah, people come down from Montana, anywhere that they all come to Salt Lake to get married on the same day. So
Wow. And
Wow.
I know you're saying that going through the endowment ceremony was overwhelming. Did you get married during that same session? It sounds like. So you got
yeah,
like endowed, and because in the mainstream LDS, I got endowed the day before we got married. And I remember all of my feelings and emotions and everything that I didn't feel like I understood, and that overwhelming feeling I had to like push down quickly, because I was like, I don't have time to process, because if I want to marry the love of my life tomorrow, then I can't have questions. I can't wonder anything about what just happened. I have to like move forward, and I have this wedding tomorrow that I need to focus
yeah,
on.
yeah.
But I can't even imagine having it all be in the same session. That was probably even heightened more, where you're going from one to the other.
Yeah, so we did get married on the same day. So what you would do is you'd go through, so the way that they have it, you would never even know that the temple is there if you didn't know that it was there. It's very well disguised and built into a home, so you wouldn't know that it
Oh,
was there. So you actually go up a couple of different levels. So you'd start on the ground level and do your washings and anointings, and then you would do a couple of different parts of the ceremony, and then you'd make your way up the stairs. And eventually you'd find yourself in the celestial room, where then you would do the sealings in your marriage. So in the AUB, because everybody got married on the same day, we would all have to rotate like receptions. And
Mm.
so some people would so I did my wedding reception on a Thursday because someone else was doing theirs on Friday. And then someone else that got married the same day did theirs on Saturday. So you would try to alternate
okay.
receptions so that you weren't overlapping someone else's reception.
So
But
everybody could come to the same wedding.
yeah, so everyone could come to the same, the same celebrations. And so yeah, it was a little bit harder that way, but I feel like that's why these ceremonies would take 6 hours, 7 hours. Sometimes we'd get there at 7 a.m. You'd be done at 2, depending on how many people were getting married that day. And
Wow.
then most of the people only came through the endowment house that were part of the session, or they were the workers that were helping with the session. And then once you get into the celestial room where you'd be sealed, then there's where some of the family and friends who were worthy could be a part of that to watch the sealings for the marriages
Okay.
have happened. Yeah.
Sounds familiar to the mainstream.
Yeah, a lot of it.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, that the AUB has kind of held on to the original teachings from Brigham Young and Joseph Smith in the temple.
Yeah. Yep. My last understanding was everything was live. You still have your tokens. You still have all your stuff. Mm-hmm.
Because the mainstream LDS church has kind of made some changes along the way that has made it less shocking for those going through for the first time.
And
Yeah.
shortened it. It recently got shortened again. It had gotten shortened right before Sam and I got married. And then I just read an article from the church this year that they shortened it again. So now it's like less than 2 hours.
Right.
It's
Oh,
very
wow.
short,
Yeah.
like the whole thing. So
So, I hear it used to be a lot longer, and that
Yeah.
if you're holding on to the original teachings from Brigham Young, especially,
Yep.
that there can be some moments in there where if you have no idea what's coming, you might be a little shocked.
I was
So,
very shocked. I was stunned because I had no idea. And the first part of the ceremony where I actually participated, because you get up and you actively participate in the ceremony, in the endowment, it didn't register to me what I was saying and doing. And it
mm,
took the next, because you move from room to room. And so when I went into the next room and I did it again, that's when it registered to me what I was saying and doing. And I was
gotcha.
very stunned. I was like, wait, what? And then when we got into the actual room, into the celestial room, or, when you're going through the veil, I remember looking around like, am I the only one that is sitting? Like, I felt maybe I was the odd man out. Like, am I the only one that's going, what in the heck is happening here? So it felt very aggressive to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, wow.
I can guarantee you were not the only one thinking that, but no one's going to dare speak up. Not in a
right.
situation like that, especially that you have been raised with your whole life to believe is very special and sacred. I mean,
Well, and the social pressure is huge. I remember coming through into the celestial room my first time, and I had all of those thoughts in my head. And then as everybody that I love that's a part of this church comes up and gives you hugs and says,
Exactly.
"Congratulations, we're so happy for you." and they all seem like they're fine with what just happened. And you're sitting there trying to process, and all you're getting is all this love and adoration and admiration for your choice to do this big step. And there's so much social pressure of like, oh my gosh. And I know that we had another extended family member go through, and we were in the celestial room, and she actually said, the inside thoughts out loud. And she was like, that was weird. Like, what's going on? And everyone was like, oh, you must have felt embarrassed at this one point. It's okay. You just need to keep going back until it feels better. And that's what like everyone said. And then later I remember her kind of like declaring to the family, like, oh, I went back like a couple times the next week and I feel way better about it now. Like almost feeling like she needed to declare that she got to the point that everybody else is, because there's that social pressure of look at how holy they all are. They get it. It must be a me thing. I'm the problem that's not understanding. And if only I'm more holy, or if I go more often, then hopefully I can feel as enlightened as they are, and I'll be in the know too. Right? There must be, at least that's how I felt.
Right.
Right. Well, with my parents there, and I was so young, I just wanted their approval. I just wanted my dad's approval. And so, of course, I'm going to say and do whatever he needs me to do to see that, that approval on his face towards me. And they're both, both my parents are looking at me all with all this much, adoration, going, oh my gosh. And I'm his first child to be married this way. And so I was the first one out of about 350 grandchildren. I was the first one to do it. And so,
wow, a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
well,
it was a lot.
And then you have, like you said, you're looking for your dad's approval. And then you have all of these family members and people that are showing you all of this love and congratulating you. And that is very easy to interpret those feelings of support and love into feeling the Spirit. So then you go from, oh my gosh, I'm feeling these warm, fuzzy feelings that must be from the Spirit. This must be coming from God. So then you take it one step further and say, well, this is what God wants me to do. And so there's no questioning. There's no questioning whether or not it's true, because you're having those feelings that you have been told your whole life are from feelings of the Spirit, and the Spirit is speaking to you. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, because that I've gone through those moments where it was so evident to me in my mind that it was the Spirit speaking to me.
Right. And that's how we justify our behavior. And that's where so many people say, well, how did you fall for that? You just explained very clearly how people will fall for it, because you believe what you're feeling is the Spirit telling you that what you're doing is right, when you're really looking for approval and acknowledgement of what you're doing is the right thing.
Before we go more into more of your marriage, because I do have more questions about your first marriage and what that looked like at such a young age. Cory, I know you were saying that you left from Montana and ended up living with an LDS family member as a teenager as well. Did you ever go through the temple in the AUB, or was that kind of your shift away from the AUB?
Yeah, I never went through the temple. When I was young, I did have not only my parents, but I had grandparents that pushed on me that I needed to study and get my own testimony of the gospel. And so I read a lot. My grandfather, who was LDS, really pushed me to read the Book of Mormon. And one of my favorite passages in the Book of Mormon when I was younger was King Benjamin talking about the Gadianton robbers and the secret signs and tokens and handshakes that they had, and that was the sign of the Gadianton robbers. So then probably when I was 16 or 17, we went to a friend's house. They had satellite, which was a no-no. Growing up, all I ever had was
VHS.
Yeah, VHS tapes that the family approved us to watch. And we watched on satellite a movie called The God Makers, where it showed the secret signs and tokens of the
church temple.
And I came back and confronted my dad on that. Is this really what goes on? Because King Benjamin says that's wrong. And he was like, well, this is more sacred. And I'm like, so probably when I was 16 or 17 and watched that, I was like, no, I'm never going to make, I'm not going to be a part of the Ghanaian robbers. And so I studied and studied and studied and had so many questions, and my dad couldn't answer them. And so I asked my grandparents who were in the LDS church. They couldn't answer them. And so, no, I had a distinct at a young age that I didn't want it. I was leaving. I came down here and lived with my LDS family. They wanted me to go do all the stuff. I'm like, okay, I'll try that. So I went through that process, but I still had the questions that nobody could answer. And so I just kept studying on my own and eventually went, I feel like I take the fine threads of truth out of all the dogma that's in there, and to be kind to each other, to love one another, and then we've tried to rearrange the way we have parented and not be full of shame and guilt and everything that we grew up with. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Love that. Okay. Well, going back to you, Melanie, because now I'm like excited to hear you and Cory get together. But first, we got to get a little bit more of what happened with you. So,
with my brother husband, he's a
Cory refers to him as his brother husband. He has since we got together for 25 years.
Hey, at least you can make light of it, of a situation that's got to be so frustrating. But
Yeah.
I have a better relationship with him than she does.
do you actually know him?
Yeah.
Oh,
He spent very many holidays at our home. Yeah.
I knew him before they got married. I went to her first wedding.
Yeah, he was at my first wedding. He was,
but I didn't know her.
Yeah, we didn't know each other.
I knew.
He was dating my ex-husband's little sister at the time. This is Polygamy 101. We're all mixed in.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's a strong word, dating. I was more friend zoned. And so I was being a good friend, drove her down here so she could hang out with her boyfriend at their wedding.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, my word.
We don't filter a lot. Sorry.
No, I love it. I'm here for it. Okay, so man, that's a whole. I thought you were just joking a little bit when you called a brother husband. I didn't realize there was like an actual friendship there. That's so funny. Okay, so you're at her wedding. You get married at 17. You did mention quickly that you had children very quickly, right? Can you give us a little bit of what did plural marriage and what did being married at such a young age look like, and how did that feel for you, being still a teenager?
Yeah, so we got married 8 days into 17. I instantly got pregnant. My first baby was born like 3 days shy of us being married 9 months. And so I was instantly sick, throwing up. Like I had morning sickness so bad. So he was already out looking for another wife at that point. Yeah, but over the marriage altar, I very much became a piece of property to him, and he let the whole room know it. Like he was not shy about the fact that I just became his property. He was 25 and I was 17. And so, so I got sick, and so he instantly was out looking for another wife after that. So I had the first one, and I mean, there was a whole, I look back on it now and just how abusive it was. There's a whole amount of abuse all the way through that relationship. And then we started courting the one girl really seriously. And she was 16. I was 18 at this point. And then I got pregnant again with my second. And so I decided to end the courtship at that point because I didn't want to go through that experience. And she was very young. I mean, she was so young, and so then we ended up that courtship, and I ended up having my second baby at 19. And we went to family Sunday schools with, and then that's when my dad was actually called to the priesthood council and became one of the 12 apostles. So that was my first like really big, when he started dating the second wife, that was my really big crisis of faith, very first. And then at 19, when my dad became on the council, that was my second big crisis of faith. So then we started, and then I had the 2 babies, and then I just got really, really depressed because I didn't want to live plural marriage, and I didn't know what to do, how to get out of it. And it was like really on my front doorstep. What could I do about this now? And we had purchased a home, and there was enough space for another wife, and I was just being selfish at that point. And so we purchased that home at the end of May. And then by that October, I was extremely suicidal. And I was just, and so at that point I tried to, the only way to get away from this situation and this man basically is to end my own life, because you can't go to heaven if you end your own life. And so that was the only way that I would be separate from him for all eternity, because now I'm owned by him for all eternity. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so in at the end of August, I had an attempt. And then that's when I was introduced to therapy, which I had never gone to therapy. Therapy was considered to be a taboo thing. You just didn't do it. But I was damaged and sick enough that I needed to do it. And so I postpartum pretty severely, and yeah, just a bunch of stuff. So, and all the meanwhile, throughout our entire marriage, there was addictions going on in the background that I wasn't fully aware of. And so, yeah, at 21, 22, I started to really, after about a year and a half of therapy, I really started to question, like, what is happening? What am I doing? And then we were at a Sunday school, and I watched one of the men goggle at my 2-year-old little girl on the floor. And I watched the way it was so overwhelmingly creepy in my gut that I just went, I can't do this to her. I can't have this life for her. And so I decided to leave. At that point, I was 22 years old. And so I decided to leave, and my ex-husband was so angry with me because he can't get into heaven if I don't obey him and do what I'm told. And so he was pretty angry with me, but he left with me at that time. And then I can't say that I've ever heard God's voice, but if I did say that I heard God's voice, it would be told me to have my third baby. It was as clear as day. I was never going to have any more children with this man. Now that I was old enough, smart enough, had been not smart enough, but been through enough therapy. So yeah, then we had our third baby, and he was born with some medical conditions. And I thought it was God punishing me for leaving. And I went back to the AUB for a couple of years. And so, but really, I thought because then at that point, my ex-husband had made all of these confessions that he had thought he had given me a disease or something that caused my little guy to be sick. And so we were trying to work through all of that for about 2 years, until finally I realized he was more committed to that lifestyle than he was to being married with children. And so at that point, I decided to leave. And yeah, it was really hard. That was a really tough couple of years. And I just didn't want to live with that hanging over my head all the time of whether I was going to get an STD of some sort. So I just decided to leave for good at that point. So I left when my baby was about 18 months old. So he's about 18 months old when I was like, I'm done. But the AUB didn't want to give me a release. They wanted me to stay married to him.
I was going to ask, when you decided to leave, each of those times, were you leaving the community physically, or were you leaving the religion, or was it both at the same time? Do you have to leave everything behind, or?
Well, we had our own home and everything, so no, I left the community, took off my garments, left the community, didn't go to church anymore. And that was for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So then when I went back, I had to be rebaptized and have my garments put back on me correctly. Okay. And then I wore garments again for the other 2 years that I was in there until I left for good. So yeah. And then at that point I took them off and started, and then Cory, and then I had met Cory along that way. And I was so in love with it, but I wasn't a threat to him in any way because I was married. And so I just got to see his character and who he was as a man. And so I was I just was so impressed with him. I wanted him to marry one of my sisters or somebody like that until I got divorced. And then I went and asked him out. So,
wow. So you met him while you were during a time that you had left the church?
Yeah. So I wasn't a member. We had left, and my best friend at the time was married to his brother. And so we had a houseboat down in Lake Powell, my ex-husband and I. And so she brought him and a couple of the other boys from his family down to our houseboat to stay with us for a couple of days. And he walked in, and I was like, we got to know each other over these vacations, and I just thought he was cute as a bug. So I was like, oh my gosh, he's so adorable.
That's funny back then.
He was very funny. And he was very competitive, which I was extremely competitive. And so, but I had zero intention of ever,
Tried to hook me up with one of her sisters.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm staying away from crazy polygamous chicks.
I don't know if we can say that, but yeah, so that's how we got to know each other a little bit. So that friendship just fostered for a couple of years. And then, of course, so I met you when I was about 22 is when I met him. I mean, I'd met him before. I just didn't know who he was. I didn't pay attention to him. I was busy raising children and being a mother. I didn't pay attention to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I knew her because I went to their wedding. I knew of her, but I didn't. I knew some of the other of her family, some of her cousins.
Yeah.
But I never really got to know her until we went down to that Lake Powell trip. So.
Okay, so Cory, what did you think about when she got divorced and came your way and asked you out?
It's
the best story ever.
I was clueless on that. She'd been trying to hook me up with a sister. I'm like, no, I'm not interested. Thank you. And so they invite us over to a barbecue. And so I go over to the barbecue and we were joking around and, hey, Melanie, how's it going? And she's like, I don't know why I was hooking you up with my sister. I should hook you up with me. And I'm like, except for you're married. And she's like, not anymore. And I'm like, oh. All of a sudden it moved her from an unavailable box to
a safe box to a very, very unsafe box.
So I panicked and said, will you give me a moment? And so
he literally left the barbecue, went to the car wash and washed his car, and then came back. He had to take that much time.
I love it.
And I was stunned.
And I had not I never legally married my ex-husband. We only were spiritually married. And I had not been able to get a release from the polygamous community up until that point. They wouldn't give me one. My ex-husband was a very good tithe payer. And so I was not allowed to get a release for a very long time. And when he found that out, so we started dating and he didn't know that I didn't have a release. Yeah. And so then so when he found that out, he ended our relationship and was just like, I can't date you until you make this happen. And I was like, why? I didn't need the AUB's approval. And I didn't know I could get legally divorced at that point either, because I was technically considered common law married. And so, that caused a huge upset. And then everything just blew up with my ex-husband, and a lot of police involvement, a lot of it got really, really bad, really, really nasty. And then finally, my Cory just said, you and I can't date. Your dad will never accept me if we keep dating and you don't have a release. And so then Cory went to my dad and asked my dad if he could date me, and which made me infuriated. I'm 26 years old at this point, right? I don't need my dad's permission.
Just being a gentleman.
He was trying to follow some of the rules of what the AUB expects still, even though we were not actively participating in the AUB. And so my dad told him no, that he needed to stay away from me, that I was going to stay married to my ex-husband, or I was going to find somebody who had already been married and had a family that could just take care of me and my children. And then and that was the first time I ever stood up to my dad. I was 26 years old. And so he was furious. He's like, you will not date that boy. You will find somebody that can just take care of you and your children. You will not be dating him. And I was like, no, Dad, I will. And that's the very first time I ever actively stood up to my father. Up until then, I did what I was told when I was told, and pretty much how I was told. So
right. How did that go? What was his reaction to you standing up to him? Because I know the feeling of not daring stand up to your dad.
It was bad. He was angry. He was so angry, and he treated Cory like trash for years. It wasn't until he didn't come to our wedding. Till our daughter was born. He treated Cory very, very poorly. And now he will now he won't talk to me, and he only likes Cory. So the roles have switched.
Yeah. Well, that's impressive that you still have that relationship with your dad. Was he the prophet of the church at this time, or not yet?
No, he only became the prophet about 2-3 years ago. So he was a 12 apostle. Yeah.
Okay, so he was an apostle, but you still have a relationship with him, even though you've completely left everything.
Yeah. Well, then I had gone back But then I left again. So yeah, he struggled with that, but he had to come to terms really quickly. I think the very first time I left the AUB, it opened up like this unspoken permission for a lot of other kids to leave. Because like I said, I was the first one out of about 350 grandchildren to leave, and no one had left before.
Wow.
And then that just really like opened up permission for other people to leave, and they started leaving quickly. And I think my dad really had to come to terms with, his statement was, I just want my children to at least believe in Christ. If I can just get that, then then they'll be okay. Then there's room to save their souls in the millennium. But right now, as long as I can at least get them to be Christ loving humans, then that quickly became his goal. So,
Wow.
So
Well,
how long did you and Cory date before you got married? Give us a timeline for that. So you're dating, Cory calls it off and says, nope, we got to wait till after you get your release, I'm guessing, finally.
I called the prophet that day and I was fuming. I was so mad. And I've been trying to get this release for 2 years. And I called the prophet that day and I was like, I will not go one more day longer. You will do this release today. And so he did. We went there. My ex-husband, I went there. I did, my mom, and he gave me the release immediately that day. But then we started dating, but I still didn't have legal ties separated from my ex-husband. And I didn't know how to do that. And so then there's a lot of police involved. And finally, one of the police officers says to me, you need to go file a restraining order and you need to file for a legal divorce. So I did that. And he didn't want Cory and I dating, so he dragged it out 1.5 years. And so then my divorce was finalized on my 10-year anniversary, like literally to the day, on my 10-year anniversary, and Cory and I got married a month later. So we've been dating for about a year, 1.5 years, almost 1.5 years before we got married. But it was such a rocky, hard, because of all of the trying to get legally divorced was, we probably could have been smarter about that and not caused so much, there wouldn't have been so much contention and police activity, because my ex-husband went to jail several times. It got really, really, really bad. And we probably we did break it off a few times where we're like, I got to get legally divorced before we can still keep doing that. But I only filed for a legal divorce so I could gain custody of my children.
That was going to be another question, is if you got to have your children through that, because especially in the FLDS where Sam came from, sometimes it's really hard for the mothers to gain custody when they're the ones leaving the community. What was your experience like leaving the AUB? Was it easy for you to take your children? Was it harder?
Yeah, that was the only thing I fought for in the divorce. And he had so much backup from so many people that did fraudulent documents, that did all sorts of things. Other AUB members were supporting him in this. And finally, I had an amazing attorney, and her and her husband had been very invested in a lot of the AUB members and have represented a lot of the AUB members. And I think without her, I don't know what I would have actually done, because she really fought a lot for me. And so he hid assets, financial asset, like it would just got really bad. And so, but through it all, the only thing I consistently did was the children. So I did get full legal custody of all 3 of my children.
Good.
And that was what I fought for. The rest of it, we owned a couple of homes. We had a lot of assets. He did really financially well for himself when we were married. And so, yeah, I lost a lot. We lost a lot of financial resources through that entire thing. But the children were really the only thing that mattered to me at that point. So, So I had legal custody of them, and he got visitations, which he chose not to exercise very often.
I see.
So,
well, hey, I'm glad that at least you got your children, because that can get complicated, especially when a church of some kind has control over those children. And I know for you, it seemed like it was a little bit more choice based, that you were able to make some decisions on your own. And hey, I'm just super proud of you for standing up against some of these men that had so much control over your life. I love to hear stories like this. So congratulations.
Thank you. I look back now and I'm like, how did I do some of the things that I did? I'm not sure where I found that. Other than I had a 2-year-old little girl at the time that I couldn't put her through that. By the time I finally got divorced, she was 6. And I couldn't look at her future and see what I had gone through. I couldn't do that to her. So
It-
I had the
It's
2 boys and then her. And so I would say 99% of the strength that I found. And I didn't want my boys to grow up and be that type of a man.
Makes sense.
it's
Makes sense.
crazy
Once you
how
have kids.
kids,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, once
Yeah.
you have kids, it's crazy how things that you think are like okay for yourself, or yeah, I don't know if okay is the right word, but we've kind of had the same talk when going through our faith journey, and we kind of put a limit on, okay, we need to make this decision before our kids are old enough to be involved in it. Like if it's not something we
Right.
want them a part of in the future, then we need to decide that before they start going to Sunday school or these things where they're more involved and more indoctrinated with certain belief systems. So it's crazy how your kids make you reevaluate everything in your life, every
Right.
aspect of it, and everything you want for them starts manifesting. Once you have
Yeah.
them, you're
Right.
like, oh my gosh.
Right. Right. And this is where it was so helpful for me to have gotten to know Cory before we dated. And gotten to know who he was and what type of character he was. Because if I had not done that, there's no way I would have dated another man from the AUB. I just wouldn't have. I would have probably stayed single for quite a while. But one day we were sitting there and I was watching Cory play on the floor with my, at the time, 2-year-old. And I was like, let's get married. And he was like, what? And so I'm like, let's do it, because I was watching him play and I thought, this is exactly what I wanted. It doesn't get any better than this. And so I asked him to marry me and he was like, are you serious? Absolutely. Let's do this. And, I didn't want to raise my children as a single parent. I didn't want to do that. And having the and I almost had every single financial resource stripped from me at that point. And so I was coming, to the point of, where do I house my children? What do I do? And so I was working 3 jobs, and
Wow.
so it's good to have a co-parent. And so it was really helpful that I got to see his character of who he was for years before we started dating. So
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like with everything you guys went through for that year of dating too, you're like, if you can make it through that, then the rest of life should be
Right.
like smooth sailing, right?
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Things only got worse after we got married with that, but it's fine. Like, we've really tried to work through that with my ex-husband, and really, like I said, he spent many holidays over here where we felt like it was safe for him to be here and interact with the kids. So some of his addictions turned from one addiction to another, and and eventually alcoholism and drugs, hardcore drugs. And so we made the conscious choice to have him here where we could be monitoring and making sure that our children were safe.
That
So
makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you two found each other. It sounds like you've created a beautiful life for yourselves. How long
Yeah.
have you been married now?
We got married in 2001. So
Okay.
we're actually going to do a series on our relationship, how we met, how we got together, and we actually did get divorced for a few years.
Wow.
Oh,
So there's a
really?
whole other
Yeah.
story there.
Yeah. And so we got divorced for 2 years, and then we decided to get back together and get married again. And so we've been remarried now for 6 years. So
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, and that's going to be coming up on your YouTube channel. Note to
yep.
self 444. We will leave
Yep.
it down in the description below so people can go check that out. And I'll be watching as well so I can get all the details
Thank
on
you.
that, because now I
Yes.
have to know.
Lots
Yeah.
more details to come for sure. So
Yeah.
where are you now? I mean, you've been remarried now for 6 years. Things are looking good. As far as specifically religiously, where do you find yourselves now?
I got a lot of good advice from people that I ask questions for from growing up, and I have a connection with my Maker directly. I don't need any other man, prophet, seer, revelator, anybody between me and my Maker. Believe in being
Yeah.
a good person, loving one another.
We don't go to church.
We don't go to church. We go up into the
Yeah.
mountains. I go fishing for Sunday. All those things. I go out into nature, into the creation of, and I don't follow any set religion. I just try to follow teachings that make me a better person. And when I have questions, I connect directly to my Maker.
Yeah.
I don't ask anybody else's. I'll ask for opinions. I'll ask for advice, but I don't follow any religion.
Yeah. And we've decided that whenever we would have had church responsibilities, those are the times we spend with our children. And we have some of the most amazing children, and they're very good people, and grandbabies. Yeah. And so we have a couple grandbabies now. And so, yeah, we don't subscribe to any religion at this point. I don't subscribe to anything that says that there's somebody between me and my maker. So we just don't do that at all. We left religion completely back in 2011, I believe. 2011 is when we left completely.
Wow.
So yeah.
I still go to functions when we're invited. I've gone to weddings. I've gone to graduations, baptisms. I still hang out. I still support everybody's belief, whichever way they want to believe.
Yeah.
So I've shown up to a lot of them. I've even went out to AUB buildings.
To a lot. Yeah, we still do go out to activities and stuff. And he still has a lot of LDS family that are convinced that one day they'll get us through the temple. That we just don't. Yeah, so we do get a lot of that pushback. And when we got divorced, back in 2016, we got divorced, and we got a lot of pushback saying that's because you guys have left religion. You lost God. You've lost all this, and that's why your marriage fell apart. And so the only way to get that back is to come back to religion, which even I think solidified our decision to not be in religion. Yeah. So
interesting how that happens. It seems that even when I left the FLDS, it seemed like we were told if you leave, everything imaginable that could possibly go wrong in your life will go wrong because Satan will have control. And so I'm not even surprised to hear that someone would blame the divorce all on because you left the religion.
But no one ever gives credit to bad things that happen within the religion being because of the religion. It's only one-sided, right? Nothing bad ever happened to anybody that was in religion.
Corey, exactly. I was going to say that those are just tests. It's no big deal.
Yeah. And so when we got back together, oh my gosh, you should have heard some of the stuff. You guys better be chaste. You guys better be like all of these things that we were really railed into us. And we weren't even sure if we were ever going to get married again. We thought maybe we would just stay together, but not. Yeah. And then our oldest son was going to get married, and we decided that we wanted to bring that energy into his marriage too, so that he could see that we had gotten, that we'd worked things through. So we didn't tell anybody. We just ran down to the courthouse and got legally married again. So, because we didn't want to overshadow his wedding. Right. So we just went and did our own thing, and then invited all of our children home and just said, this is what we've done. We want you guys to see that we have made that commitment again to each other. And so that's why, and it's been a journey to get to where we are now. It has not been easy. It's been really hard, which is one of the reasons too I started the podcast, is because I said to Cory, we've talked about this. We can't go through some of the things that we have gone through, especially with that divorce, and then find where we are now and not help other people. There's got to be a way that we can help other people with our story.
Yeah. I love that. And that kind of segues perfectly into the last thing that we always do at the end of an interview is we ask if somebody is watching this today, and whether they are currently in the AUB in a plural marriage themselves, or they're struggling in their marriage or something, what is something you would like to say to somebody if you knew that they would listen?
What do you think? I'll let you go first.
You have the right to connect and speak to your own maker. You don't need to have anybody telling you what to do. And there are so many resources, so many out here in the big, scary world. People are loving, kind, sweet. They're good people out here. So, and you don't have to be scared about coming out here into the world. So, with us Gentiles.
I love that.
Yeah. And for me, it's like when you're sitting there trying to just breathe through the next 30 seconds and you don't know if the next minute will come, it will always come, and you'll always get there. And I feel like how I found myself again was through gratitude. Yeah. And gratitude really, I started a gratitude journal, and gratitude is really the place where you find yourself for me. And so when you have those moments where you're just not sure where life is going to go, stop and think about all the things that you have. Even if you don't believe it in that moment, could you possibly be grateful for that? So, yeah.
I love that.
And
So
I love where
good.
we're at now. We're in the best place we've ever been in our lives now. So,
Good.
Good. Well,
Well,
thank you guys so much.
yes, congratulations on making it through so much. It's just crazy to me how many people we meet that have been through so much stuff in their life that it's impressive that you were able to make it through it all and find this happy place together now in your life. So congratulations. We're very happy to hear that. And congratulations on your YouTube channel, Note to Self 444, to get out there and share your experiences in trying to help other people get through this stuff and find happiness in their life as well. So
Yes, to all our viewers, go check out the YouTube channel. Also, stay tuned because we're going to be doing another episode with Melanie and Cory as they share with us more of their experiences and perspective within the AUB and on specifically sister wives and the Brown family. Because, like I said at the beginning, Melanie is in the know. So we are excited to be able to do an episode with them on that. So stay tuned for that next week.
Yes. Thank you, Cory. Thank you, Melanie. We really appreciate you being here on here with us.
thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk to y'all soon.